Welcome everyone. This is Mishnah in-depth Masechet Yevamot. This class is designed to accompany independent daily study of the Mishnah following the Mishnah Yomit schedule, meaning weekly, to augment independent study, enhance understanding of the mishnayot, and support each other as a community of learners. This class is a project of Drisha's Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in the memory of Rifka Rosenwein by her family. As we have for the rest of Masechet Yevamot, we have the pleasure of learning with the Dean of Drisha, Rabbi David Silber. I will be sending out promotions to panelists shortly for people who are watching on Zoom, and if you accept it, you can speak directly, unmute yourself, ask questions clearer, turn on your camera. All I ask is if you are doing this, please keep yourself muted when not actively speaking in class. Questions are always welcomed in chat. This is both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. And no matter which platform you're on, ask in chat, and I'll bring them to Rabbi Silber's attention when he pauses for questions. If you have your own set of mishnayot you're following with, great, but I will also share sources on screen from Sfaria with the relevant mishnayot. With that, Rabbi Silber, it's all yours.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so we're learning Yevamot. We're getting close to the end of Masechet Yevamot, which is a 16-chapter tractate, and it's understood as one of the more complicated and difficult tractates. Which I guess is good. If you get through it, you can look forward to having a bit easier time with some of the remaining tractates.
Rabbi Silber?
Yes.
Can you shift your camera slightly up? You're getting cut off right at your eyes. Thank you. Yes.
Right. Okay, so we have 3 weeks left. We have today, next week, and there's an additional class on the 24th just to finish the tractate. So obviously we're doing selected mishnayot, but I think we really can't do justice to the tractate till we deal with 2 topics. One actually we'll do next week, which is chalitza. That is to say, the woman who's in this state of yibum, husband has died, and there is a brother, and the brother is permitted to marry her. We discuss under which circumstances he is not permitted to marry her, but he's permitted to marry her. So there are 2 options. They can do yibum, they get married, or if either one refuses, then there's this ceremony called chalitza, which frees the woman and permits her to marry anybody else that she's permitted to marry. As we have seen in the Mishnah, a get doesn't work for this woman in this circumstance. A get does come up in the mishnayot. We discussed that one of the weeks. It can actually disqualify the yibum. It can be required in the case where the yavam gave money for kedushin or ma'amar, but it never frees the woman to marry outside of the yibum relationship. So you need chalitza for that. And it was mentioned earlier, but for some reason, this is one of the mysteries of Masechet Yevamot, the entire chapter of chalitza comes up later. Not in chapter 1 or 2 where you expect to find it, but it's called the parak called Mitzvah Chalitza, which is chapter 12. And that chapter we're going to look at next week. You can't go through Yevamot without taking care of chalitza. We'll do that next week. This week I wanted to, and this week and the last week, I want to deal with a topic that comes up in 3 different chapters of Masechet Yevamot. Once again, strangely enough, it's found at the beginning of chapter 10, and we saw some of that last week. I'll just very briefly comment about a couple of mishnayot in chapter 10, and then we have chapters 15 and 16. The last 2 chapters deal with the question of permitting the woman in this situation to permitting a woman to remarry in a situation where her husband has died. There's only 2 ways for a woman to get a marriage in the Mishnah, which is either bill of divorce, a get, that's a separate tractate, Gitin, or if the husband dies. If the husband dies, the marriage is terminated. Although we've seen in the Mishnah in Yibum, in Yevamot, even when the husband dies sometimes, namely there's no children, there's a brother, so it's not actually clear if the first marriage was totally terminated. It's one of the questions. We had raised it as a question. Is it that the first marriage is still going on, or no, that marriage is over. But the second marriage is a responsibility to create a new marriage. Or is the Yavam just continuing the first marriage? Well, that's the question, and there are proofs on both sides of that question. In any event, so that is called, basically, we know it as aguna, or heter aguna. And that's a major, one of the major topics of this tractate, the idea that we want the woman to have an opportunity to remarry. And I presume it flows out of the basic idea of Masechet Yevamot. The idea of Masechet Yevamot, and the idea of the Chumash, and especially as understood by the rabbinic tradition, is that we want the man, in the case of and to some extent the woman, but the man certainly, to be allowed to have, in a sense, have children even after he's died, or have children that are somehow ascribed to him in one way or the other. So this idea, that's where the mitzvah of Pru Revu comes in the Mishnah, and in that spirit, we don't want the woman whose husband may be missing, we don't see the guy around, not to be allowed to remarry. On the other hand, you need some proof that she's not still married. So these three chapters, and especially chapters 15 and 16, deal with the questions of evidence generally, and all kinds of leniencies when it comes to finding a way to permit this woman to marry somebody else, even though we haven't seen the husband's body. We don't know, he's presumed dead, or perhaps he's dead. We don't know for sure. So under what circumstances may the woman remarry? That's called heter aguna. It's a very important issue in both I would say, philosophically, theologically, and all that. And it also is relevant, of course, we all know today, they talk about the aguna problem. Now, when they talk about aguna problem today, it can happen that the husband is missing and you don't know whether he's alive or not. And we need some kind of evidence that the husband, in fact, has died. I mean, it's come up most recently and been discussed in light of the horrible situation in Israel with these captured people. A lot of them are men. And the question is, both in terms of remarriage, in terms of chalitza, a lot of young men, unfortunately, have fallen in war, and some are married without children. What about chalitza? These are all questions that are being talked about. It's not on the front burner right now, but it's being talked about, obviously, and there should be a way to, as simply as possible, solve all these problems. But heter aguna comes up often in cases where the man refuses to give a get to his wife, or in some cases where the woman refuses to accept the get. That's also called aguna, and that's one of the issues, which is it's been around for a while, and hopefully there'll be more progress made on that issue. In any event, so the aguna is a very central question in both senses, but what's typically discussed is the recalcitrant husband who won't give a get. So I think so we're going to take a look at what the Mishnah has to say about aguna. So we already started with the mishnayot in chapter 10. I'm not going to go over that again, but let me just review what it says in chapter 10. Chapter 10 begins with three mishnayot, which deal with the situation where a woman, husband is perhaps has died, and how do we know that he's died or not? So the Mishnah in Mishnah 1, Mishnah 2, Mishnah 3 talk about situations, the two main situations. Normally, the way the Gemara understands the Mishnah, normally you need testimony. The word for testimony is edut. Now the question is, how many witnesses do you need? When you're adjudicating a case, how many witnesses do you need? So the Torah says, when it comes to capital crimes, al pi shnayim edim o shlosha edim yumat hamet, lo yumat al pi ed echad. The Torah says that when it comes to capital cases, the Torah says a strange thing. The Torah says either 2 or 3 witnesses are needed. Of course, the Gemara asked the question, if you need 2, why does the Torah mention 3? That's not our question right now, but the Torah says 2 or 3. The person is put to death in a capital crime only if there are 2 or 3 witnesses, okay? So we know that in capital crimes, you need 2 witnesses. The Gemara assumes that not only in capital crimes do you need two witnesses, but if there's a monetary matter, you also need two witnesses. I say you stole something from me and you deny it. I bring witnesses that you did steal it. So I have to bring two witnesses. One witness is not enough. That's the understanding of the Gemara. It's an expansion of what the Torah says about capital crimes, about murder. You need two, I say two, minimum of two. So in monetary matters, you also need two. Now, when I say you need two in monetary matters, and this is not in the Mishnah over here, but I'm just going to mention it anyway, it's a different tractate. In Tractate Nezikin, talks about torts and criminal law and all that, that sometimes one witness is enough. Now, let's say in a monetary case, I say you owe me $100, and you say I owe you nothing, or I paid you, or I never borrowed, whatever it is, and I produce a witness, and the witness says, yeah, she does owe $100. Not two witnesses, one witness. So in that case, actually, I can collect money from you on the basis of one witness. But in that case, the way the Gemara understands it, one witness is not enough to extract the money. But one witness is enough to force you to swear that you don't owe the money. And typically, people don't like to swear if they don't have to. So if you refuse to swear, you have to pay. If you do swear, then you can win. You swear I don't owe the money, and you win. So the one witness in that case, in that monetary case, you can't extract the money because you need two witnesses for that. But it does accomplish something. It accomplishes something. Fine. Now, what about for other matters? Not for monetary matters, not for capital crimes, not for offenses of theft or stuff like that, but for other matters. I walk into your house and there's a cake on the table. I say to you, is that kosher? And you go, oh, of course, a kosher cake. Do we believe you? Maybe it's not kosher. Maybe instead of butter, you use lard or something. So, of course, the Gemara says, this appears in many places in the Talmud, Eid echad neman b'yisurim, when it comes to isurim, like issues of kashrus and all kinds of questions, one witness is sufficient. Exactly, the proof text for that is a great dispute between Rashi and Tosfot. Everybody jumps in. That's the general principle. Eid echad neman b'yisurim. Now, what about a different case? Not about isurim. One witness is enough, and anybody can qualify as a witness there. There are certain restrictions for witnesses, which are not our province right now, but let's say you need a so-called kosher witness, whatever that means, right? But for Eid Echad B'Yisurin, for the cake, anybody is, someone who's truly suspect is believed. But what about in a different area, what they call Davar Shebi Ereva? Matters relating, say, to marriage, divorce, those kinds of questions. So how many witnesses do you need for that? To say someone is married, to testify somebody is married. Is one witness sufficient? Or do you need two witnesses? Somebody is divorced. Do you need one witness or two? So in general, the principle in the Talmud is Ein Davar Shebi Ereva Pachot Mishnayot. And when it comes to matters of divorce, marriage, and those kinds of issues, or Davar Shebi Ereva, then we require two witnesses. It's the same as the capital rules of capital crime, of offenses, etc. Same as money. Generally speaking, you need two witnesses. So the point of the Mishnah, the three chapters that deal with aguna, have the following problem. I mean, what they're wrestling with is the following: that typically a woman is married, and we know she's married. It's not that we don't know. Let's assume we know that she's married. She was married. Now, she claims, or she brings witnesses who claim that she's no longer married. Let's say that the husband died. So the question is, if you have two witnesses who say the husband died, then typically we believe two witnesses. The default is to believe two witnesses. That's not a problem. Then she can be married. And remember, by the way, when they say the husband died, there's another issue that I mentioned last week. Always important to remember. Marriage is not just a relationship situation. Marriage is a financial arrangement. So if the husband died, if the husband predeceases the wife, then there's the ketuvah. The woman collects the ketuvah, and the ketuvah has different pieces to it. There's the ketuvah, there's the tosefet, the additional stuff. There are all kinds of additional obligations. But let's go with the ketuvah. So if there are two witnesses, there's no problem. What about if there's one witness? What do you do in that case? So all things being equal, we should say, based on the general principles, that ein davar she'b'yeva pachot mishtayim, that one witness is insufficient. If you have only one witness, the husband died, we have to wait around to find a second witness. And in the absence of a second witness, unfortunately, this woman can never remarry because she's considered a married woman, and the woman can only have one husband. So therefore, under those circumstances, she has to wait to get a get. And if he's dead, she'll never get the get, obviously. On the other hand, we don't know for sure that he's dead. Maybe he ran away, maybe whatever, he's captured, who knows? So that's what should be based on the general principles of testimony in the Talmud, some of which is found in different mishnayot. But the tradition wants to allow the woman to remarry. So there are all kinds of leniencies when it comes to aguna. We'll take a look at some of those in chapter 15 is where it comes. I probably haven't gotten to there yet, but we'll have to jump to that a bit. Before we jump to that, I want to remind everybody what we saw last week. In the first three mishnayot of chapter 10. So the Mishnah, if you take a look at the Mishnah in chapter 10, the first Mishnah of chapter 10, I'm not going over it again, but it's a long, very long Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, in a case where, and it's not clear exactly what the case is. The Mishnah says, chapter 10, Mishnah 1, Ha'isha shehalach ba'ala l'mdinat hayam, u'ba'u v'amru la meit ba'alech, v'niseit, v'yachar kach ba ba'ala, teitzei mizeh u'mizeh, u'tzricha get mizeh u'mizeh, and the Mishnah goes on. What is the case? A woman's husband went overseas. Let's say Medinat hayam is overseas, far away. In those days, there's very little communication. So he went on a business trip, wherever who knows. He went someplace. He went overseas. And they came and they said to her, Ubo v'armula. They said to her, now who was the they over here? So as often happens, the Gemara has an interpretation of the Mishnah. The Gemara assumes that the case, but it says they said to her, it doesn't mean actually they. It means they said, like in a case where witnesses come and say. But the Gemara's understanding is that the Bo v'amnullah, even though it's plural, refers to a case where one witness came. A witness comes and says, your husband has died. If this is the reading of the Mishnah, which the Gemara puts forth, and then she means she gets married. So if you read it this way, the Mishnah is saying that if she hears that she heard the husband died, how'd she hear it? Someone came and told her. Then she's permitted to marry. So she got married. But then, what do you know? 3 weeks later, the guy shows up. Where were you, honey? Whatever. Shows up. So now it turns out, but she's married. Reuven is the first husband. Shimon's the second husband. She's married to Shimon, and now Reuven shows up. So the Mishnah says, and this is what we read last week, that under these circumstances, there's a penalty, a very severe penalty. She loses all privileges and rights of a married woman. She has to divorce both of them, and she has no benefit from it. And Mishnah goes on and on. In the Gemara, this is called the 13 penalties. It's very severe penalties for this woman. And the interesting thing is, this is the first Mishnah. So there's all these severe penalties. And you could understand it if you take the Talmud's reading of the Mishnah in chapter 10, Mishnah 1, that we're talking about a case where one witness came. Normally speaking, you don't rely on one witness. Okay, she's allowed to remarry based on just one witness, but it comes with a penalty. In other words, she understands that if she accepts the witness, follows the witness, and she does remarry, then there could potentially be a penalty. So you could read this as, in this case, certainly, we want to make sure that the woman is certain that the husband has died. Somebody comes. Maybe the guy just wants to do her a favor. Maybe the guy just wants to get her in trouble. Maybe whatever. So she's going to be very careful. She talks to this witness, and she's got to figure out, do I believe him or not? And she can believe him, and she can remarry, but it comes at a cost. And one way to understand the Mishnah is that we want to make sure that when the woman remarries, that she really believes this guy's on the level. So perhaps that's the reason for the penalty in this case, in Mishnah number 1 of chapter 10. The problem is that we now move to Mishnah number 2. In Mishnah number 2, it says Niseit al pi beitin, right? So Mishnah number 2 can also be understood as same as Mishnah number 1. There was one witness. When there's one witness, okay, normally one witness is not good. So in Mishnah number 2, as is in Mishnah number 1, there was only one witness, but she goes to the court, and the court gives her permission to remarry. Why would she go to the court? She would go to the court because there's just one witness. Normally speaking, one witness is no good, so she wants the court to validate it. And the court said to her, you have a witness, okay, we permit you to remarry. And the same thing happens. She remarries, and then the first guy shows up. So in this case, and only in this case, the Mishnah says, seems to say, the same penalties apply. So it's the same case. It's one witness, but when she's married to the second guy, she marries the second guy, right? But she's a married woman. So when married woman is a capital crime, and for those kinds of forbidden relationships, it was done by accident. We consider it an accident because there was a witness. So, and the court said you can do it. So she did something by accident, okay? But when you do a crime that if you did it on purpose, the punishment is karet, then if you did it by accident, you bring a korban chatat. That's the first Mishnah in Tractate Kritut. There are 36 such cases, Lamed of Kritut. And almost all of them, you bring a korban if you did it by accident. So the point is, so in the case she went to the court, right? Yofa koach beitin sheprotra min korban. So if by going to the court, she relies on the court, then she wouldn't have to bring the sacrifice if it turns out that the first husband is actually alive. But it sounds like all the other penalties may still obtain. So this is a case where one witness comes and she goes to court. Now we have Mishnah number 3. Mishnah number 3. In Mishnah number 3, that's a different case. Let's read Mishnah number 3. Okay, so you have a case where the woman's husband and son, they went on a trip overseas. They're traveling overseas. And they came and said to her, and the understanding over here is they is actually plural. In other words, in the first 2 mishnayot, the cases where there's just one witness, which is why she went to court, actually. But in this case, 2 witnesses come, and they say to the woman, we're sorry to tell you that your husband and your child died. But they died in the following order. First, the husband died, and then your child died. So she got married, V'niseit. So she married, based on the 2 witnesses. And this seems like totally legitimate. 2 witnesses are valid testimony everywhere. She's doing nothing wrong over here. Everything is kosher. And she marries. But then they come and say, what we said is true, but in reverse order. We told you it's true, your husband and your son died, just got the order backwards. We said earlier we said that your husband died and then your son died. but it's the other way around. Your son died first, and then your husband, right? Right. Amrullah mate benech. They say to her, "Oh, let me get this straight." Right. So, in other words, let's start over again. If they came and said your husband and son died, she remarried, okay, and now it turns out it's in the opposite order, right? So it's in the opposite order that the son died before the husband. That means there's a case of yibum, because when the husband died, they had no children, because their child had already died. So in that case, and she married somebody else. So in that case, the Mishnah says harishon v'achron mamzer. Now, the truth of the matter is that the child born to Shimon, the second guy, right, should not be a mamzer. Why not? Because the husband's dead, but there should have been yibum, and she didn't marry the yavam; she married somebody else. But we already know from the Mishnah earlier that whether the child of that union is a mamzer depends on the disagreement between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. Rabbi Akiva held any forbidden relationship produces a mamzer. But the rabbis said, no, only the ones that are listed as karet have the punishment of karet. But the woman marrying, the woman whose husband has died with no children, and she has to marry the yavam, and she marries somebody else, that's called the yavamo lashuk, ish zar. That's forbidden, but it's not karet. But Rabbi Akiva held it's karet. So in that case, that's why it says if it's karet, it's mamzer. Rabbi Akiva holds it's mamzer without karet. Not karet in this case, but fine. So the Mishnah follows the view of Rabbi Akiva. Amrullah made benech. If they told her the other way, your son died first, and then your husband died, so she did yibum, because the son died first. So there's yibum. When the husband died, there were no children. So she married the brother. So in that case, that's certainly true, because the yibum, because she's marrying the brother, but the brother, as we know from our study of Yevamot, if it's not a case of yibum, and the brother is your brother-in-law is actually forbidden to you, and it's a current. It's one of the basic pillars of this tractate. Yibum is the mitzvah that permits you to marry someone who otherwise would be an issakaret. Right. Now the point is, as the Mishnah continues, and you scroll down, right. So the Mishnah goes on. Amrullah meit ba'alech b'niseit, v'achachach amrullah kayam hayav meit. No, he died afterwards, but he was alive when you remarried. Teitzei. V'yavlad v'rishon mamzer. The point is that according to this Mishnah, right? According to this Mishnah, even in a situation where there are two witnesses, but still we have this knas that she has to she can't remain married to either husband, even though you would say, why can't she stay married to the first guy? I know she can't be married to the second guy because she was always married to the first guy. But why must she get divorced from the first guy? She did absolutely nothing wrong. And yet the Mishnah seems to say, for whatever reason, I simply have questioned that this knas, something is in place over here. A woman remarries on the assumption the husband has died. And it turns out he hasn't died. So there are two possible cases. One is there was just one witness. One is there are two witnesses. And it seems from the Mishnah that these penalties can exist in both cases. So it sounds very severe. She did nothing wrong. She absolutely did nothing wrong. Even she went to the court, she did nothing wrong. And yet, in the event that he actually shows up, there are all kinds of penalties. That is one of the, that's one of the, in terms of the Aguna issue. This is the case. This happened after the Shoah. They had a lot of women got remarried on the assumption the husband had died, and then there were cases where the guy shows up many years later. What do you do in that case? So there's a whole literature about that. But let's point out that in chapter 10, there seems to be penalties for the woman who remarries, even in cases where she seems legitimately, she marries totally legitimately, even when there are two witnesses. She can't live with either husband. Why not? That's the case in Mishnah 10, chapter 10. This is how chapter 10 starts. What I'd like to do is just to tackle the Aguna thing, to jump ahead for a moment to chapter 15. Those that are doing the Mishnah may have not gotten to 15. Let's just jump to 15. Chapters 15 and 16 are all about Aguna. So this actually is extremely interesting. And this is a different case. It's related to chapter 10. And this is a fascinating case. So the Mishnah starts with a case. Remember, we've seen in the Mishnah deals mostly with cases. It usually doesn't simply have abstract rules. It gives you cases. So the case over here is Aisha Shalach Holchahi Ubala Lemdinat Hayam. So this couple takes a vacation. Avram and Sarah. They go on a vacation. They go across the ocean. And when they're going across the ocean, Shalom Beino Leveina, it's a happy couple, a happy, loving couple. Shalom Ba'olam. And they're traveling to a place which is very peaceful. There's no wars going on. All is lovely and beautiful. They're going on a nice trip together. And now, a while later, she comes back alone. Ubatavi Amra Meit Ba'ali. She comes and she says, my husband has died. Tina says the Mishnah, we allow her to get married. Now, and this is a case where there's no witnesses at all. Zero. She comes back and makes a claim, my husband has died. Now, we know that she was married. We have witnesses at the wedding. The witnesses at the wedding are Ed Mekudeshusly, and it's generally known they're married for 20 years, whatever. They're married. So the problem is, what do you mean that she can come and say, I'm not married anymore? He died. Yeah, he died. Let's see the death certificate. Let's see what she has no evidence. So the Mishnah says, under these circumstances, we actually believe her. We actually believe her. This is a different case. This is not about witnesses. This is her own personal statement. Not only that, if she says Meit Ba'ali Tit Yabein, not only that, if they have no children, and she said my husband died, we allow her to marry the brother, to do yibum. So yibum, of course, if it's inappropriate, it's the prohibition of karet that we allow her to do. Under this is normal circumstances. However, the Mishnah continues, Shalom beino leveina umilchama ba'olam. She and the husband get along just fine, but they're going to a dangerous place. They're traveling to a place where there's a war. Or kitata beino leveina v'shalom ba'olam. Or they're going to a nice place, but it's a quarrelsome couple. They don't get along well. Now she returns. If she comes and says he died, we don't believe her. We don't believe her for one of two reasons. Either because maybe he died and she doesn't know it. In other words, there's a war. Maybe he went off to a dangerous neighbor, didn't come back, and she assumes that he's dead, but there's no evidence that he's dead. There's no one witness. There's nothing. Just her assumption. So we don't believe that because she's a loving wife, but she assumes he's dead, but maybe he's not really, maybe he survived or whatever. Or the other case is where they're fighting all the time. So then we don't believe her because we suspect that they went overseas and whatever happened to the guy, and she wants to dump this guy, and she can't give him a get or anything. So therefore, we don't allow her to remarry based on her word alone, because she's suspect, because there's katata, there's arguments between them. That's the view of Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we never believe her. How can you rely on, there's no testaments, no witnesses. How can you believe her? He says, if she comes back mourning with torn clothing, then there's evidence that unless she's a great actress, so we can believe her only in that case. But the rabbis said no. Umbrella, they said to him, say, no, you don't need the torn clothing and the crying. And the Gemara says, because they say to him, listen, if you don't trust her, right? As he says, achatzu v'achatzu. In all cases, you need the woman to be crying and stuff. And they say, no, because if that's what it's about, she'll put on widow's garments and cry, and she'll be able to remarry. So that's not it. No. Fundamentally, according to the rabbis, we believe her. Fundamentally, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we don't believe her except in the most exceptional circumstances. That's the dispute of Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Another question is, this is the big question, why do we believe her, in fact? I mean, we all feel bad for the woman, but why do we believe her? You need testimony. And normally you need two witnesses. So why do we believe one witness? In the case over here, we have no witnesses. Why do we believe her? So here, in terms of the explanation, the Mishnah doesn't explain why. Let's put it that way, right? The Mishnah gives you rules, and it doesn't explain. Within the Gemara and the interpreters of the Gemara, there are two main reasons that are given for why do we allow the aguna, the woman, to remarry based on just one witness, let's say. So first of all, there are two important ideas that are discussed in relationship to these mishnayot, to aguna. Very important to know this. The Rambam, his interpretation, what he emphasizes is that in certain cases, it's called the milta davide ligluye. It's a matter that in the future we'll find out the truth. The Rambam claims that the case is someone who's died. Typically, the Rambam says, after some time, you find out whether or not the person has died. There are extreme cases where you don't find out. But usually the Rambam says, guy went overseas, okay, he's missing, he didn't come back, but maybe he'll come back in 2 months, or maybe someone will find the body in the 6 months. So the point is, probably the truth is going to come out. And therefore, since the truth is going to come out, we believe the woman who speaks because she knows the truth. She wouldn't lie. Because why would you lie about something that in short order, people are going to find out? The fact that she makes this claim that he died, okay? Or the fact that one witness comes and we believe the witness, that is to say, she's permitted to rely upon the witness. Because we say a witness wouldn't say something that in short amount of time, perhaps, maybe next week, we'll find out the truth. So that's one general approach, and that the Rambam says it's a milta davide liguye. That's one general approach. The other general approach is, these general approaches have other pieces to them as well. The other general approach is what they call isha daika uminsaba. The woman who's going to remarry will check things out very well. She'll check things out very well, largely because she doesn't want to be in a situation herself where the first guy is going to come back. Because if the first guy comes back, then we have what we encountered in chapter 10 of this Masechet, which is all of these fines and punishments and limitations. She forfeits all kinds of property. Her children are called mamzerim. So the woman wouldn't want that. So therefore, it's really related in a sense to chapter 10. Because there are such harsh penalties, therefore she's going to be very careful before she does anything. Isha daika uminsaba. That as a general rule. Those are the two general statements about aguna. Now, in addition to that, we have the view of some of the Tosafos. And it's very important to know this. I want to mention this because it's important to know it. The Gemara is a very important sugya. The Gemara, in general, raises the following question. This is not in the Mishnah, but it's in the Gemara, in Daf Tzadi, Yevamot, page 90. The Gemara is interested in the question of does the court, do the rabbis have the right to temporarily suspend the Torah? How much power do the rabbis have? Can they suspend things can they suspend the Torah? So the point is that the Gemara typically has the dispute. Can they tell you not to do? Can they tell you to violate the Torah, but not that you actively violate the Torah? Can they tell you to not to fulfill the Torah, or they don't have that power? So the Gemara assumes that they have the right to tell you not to fulfill the Torah, not to do a mitzvah, which they do very often. We had it this year, I believe, right? On the holiday of Sukkot. On the first day of Sukkot, we didn't wave the lulav and the etrog. And Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, as it did this past year. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we didn't blow the shofar. Why didn't we blow the shofar? So according to the Talmud Bavli, they were concerned if you allow people to blow the shofar, they might carry the shofar in a public area, which is not permitted, in order to learn how to blow the shofar. So because we're concerned they might carry it, the rabbi said, don't blow the shofar. But the shofar is a commandment from the Torah. On the first day, you blow the Rosh Hashanah, you blow the shofar. So they have the right to undo the Torah in a passive matter. Two, they have the right to, in an active sense, lakor the Torah, b'kum v'aseh, in the positive sense, to simply violate the Torah. So the Tosafos, basically, what they're basically saying is, in the case of aguna, in a sense, they are violating the Torah. Because the Torah, as the Tosafos understand it, says you need witnesses in order to accomplish certain things. In order to condemn a man to death, you need witnesses. In issues of marriage and divorce, you need witnesses. But, says Tosafos, since there's a logic, since in this particular case there's a logic to why we would permit the woman to be married, because there is some evidence, there is a witness, it's not nothing. So since there's some logic to it, in this case, we are permitted to, I guess to say, to interpret in such a way that allows her to remarry. Without the witness, without the idea that she's going to be careful, people will find out, and apparently even according to the Tosafos, they couldn't just arbitrarily annul part of the Torah. But when there is a reason or some kind of logical reason to do it, then they have this power, says Tosafos. Tosafos calls it operating the Torah in a positive sense, as opposed to saying don't blow the shofar. So this is some of the thinking behind this aguna. Obviously, what's clear is that the rabbis in general are interested in trying to find a way to help this woman. That's obvious. It's also obvious that the Mishnah sees it as violating the norms of halacha. So it's actually very interesting. We think about how halacha works. Aguna is a real sense where the Mishnah already is taking the extra step. And I want to point out that the Mishnah is pretty clear that that's what the Mishnah is doing. And that we see from a later Mishnah in chapter 15. Let's see, this Mishnah in chapter 15.
Which Mishnah are you looking for?
Let's start with the next Mishnah first of all. I'll come back to that. The point I wanted to make is that there are disagreements that the Mishnah, sometimes the Mishnah has just one opinion. And sometimes the Mishnah has more than one opinion. And often it's the unnamed opinion of the Tanakama or the Stam Mishnah or the Chachamim against an individual. Normally the rule is when you have Chachamim against individuals, you follow the Chachamim. You don't follow the individuals. But what I wanted to say is that sometimes the reason the individual is mentioned in the Mishnah, even though we don't follow that path, is because the Mishnah is interested in pointing out, I would say, it's not so simple. In other words, if you work just on the books with a normal standard rule on the books, there's reason to say you can't do this. We all feel sorry, you feel bad, but you have rules. That's what rules are about. You can't always break the rules. So the inclusion of other opinions is there sometimes, I think, to emphasize that there is that other opinion, and there's a lot to it. Nonetheless, we are not following that. We go with a different path. Well, let's just take a look at the next Mishnah in chapter 15, which is a very interesting Mishnah. Let's take a look at Mishnah number 2. Beit Hillel Omrim, Lo Shamanu Ela this is it. This Mishnah I had in mind. Beit Hillel Omrim, Lo Shamanu Ela Biba'a Min HaKotzir Uviota Medina Uchemase Shahaya. What does Beit Hillel say? Beit Hillel is bothered by this. We think of Beit Hillel as being always the more lenient opinion. That's not always the case. And this Mishnah is certainly not the case. Beit Hillel said, we only permit the woman to marry based on her own testimony in the case, it's actually this comes up in the Talmud several times. There was a particular case, okay? There was a particular case where it was a certain time of the year, it was a certain state, and there were certain aspects of that particular story. So Beit Hillel says this idea that a woman can come and say, "My husband died," and we allow her to remarry. Yes, there was such a ruling in a court, but the only time we can follow that ruling is if it's exactly the same case that particular court was dealing with. We can't generalize the principle from that case, says Beit Hillel. They presumably, because it's such a radical departure, we can only follow that particular case. The Mishnah doesn't lay out what the case is. It was a certain time of the year, a certain state, and there were certain factors in the case. Amrulahen Beit Shammai, and Beit Shammai says, Achat haba min hakotzir, achat haba min hazeitim, achat haba min habotzir, achat haba min medina lemedina. Lo dibru chachamim b'kotzir, ella, I can't read the next word, ella bia hoveh. V'chazru Beit Hillel lahorot kebeit Shammai. This is an interesting Mishnah. So Beit Shammai said, Beit Hillel said, only in this case, otherwise we don't believe the woman. And Beit Hillel says, no. Beit Shammai says, that was the case. Okay, that was the case. And they said, under these circumstances, not to limit the ruling. They were just saying, we rule in this case, so-and-so, she's permitted. But Beit Shammai said, it doesn't matter, the specifics of the case are not relevant. One state, a different state, traveling from one state to the other, time of year, irrelevant. And then the Mishnah says, Chazru Beit Hillel lahorot kebeit Shammai. Then Beit Hillel changed their view and follows Beit Shammai. By the way, we have several mishnayot in the Mishnah where Beit Hillel changes their mind and follows Beit Shammai. And by the way, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, let me just review this for a moment. The Mishnah, the rabbis who appear in the Mishnah come essentially from four different generations. The oldest of them, with a few exceptions, is Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. They're earlier, and they appear in the Mishnah 310 times, which is a lot, but it's not the most. 310 times out of about 4,300 mishnayot. So the idea of Beit Hillel agreeing with Beit Shammai is interesting, because remember when we started the study of Yevamot, in the very beginning of Yevamot, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai disagree about the idea of the tzara, that under these circumstances, the tzara is exempt from yibum. Beit Shammai disagreed with that. And the Mishnah says at the end of chapter 1 that even though Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai disagreed, nonetheless, they still worked together. When they could find common ground, they worked together. And it's a very important statement in the Mishnah. So here we have Beit Shammai and Hillel again. Here, Hillel agrees with Shammai. In other words, Hillel initially tried to limit the heter of the aguna when she testifies to a very specific case, because they're bothered by it doesn't work with the normal rules. And Beit Shammai says, no, we had a ruling, and that is the general ruling for all cases. And Beit Hillel agrees with Beit Shammai. That's Mishnah number 2. And then we have Mishnah number 3. We'll just take a look at this quickly. Beit Shammai Omrim, another interesting question. Beit Shammai Omrim, Tinase betito kituvata. Beit Hillel Omrim, Tinase velotito kituvata. In other words, in the case where the woman says, my husband died, and we believe her, and Beit Hillel agrees with Beit Shammai. But, says Beit Hillel, she can remarry, but she doesn't collect the ketubah. Why doesn't she collect the ketubah? So Beit Hillel says, 1 second. You want to allow her to remarry. You want to be matir the aguna. I got all that. Okay, we have such a ruling. When it comes to the ketubah, it's not a matter of relationship, of davar shebi erva. This is a monetary matter. A ketubah is a monetary obligation. We know that for monetary obligations, you need 2 witnesses. So yes, I'm willing to suspend the ruling about davar shebi erva and allow it to remarry based on her own testimony or 1 witness even. But we can't say the same thing for the ketubah. There's no evidence. There's no proof. So, but here you see that Beit Hillel is splitting the 2. Beit Hillel is going to say she can remarry, but she can't collect the ketubah. And Beit Shammai says, no. Once you allow her to remarry, she automatically collects the ketubah. And the logic, Amru lahem Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai says to Beit Hillel, Hitartem erva chamura, if you permit her to remarry, which is erva chamura, that's a very serious matter. She's a married woman. It's a capital crime. But you're saying based on her, we believe her to remarry, and the court permits her, we permit her to remarry, we're going to waive the possibility of actually mitat beitin karet, lo tatir et mamon akal. You're worried about the money? So Amru lahen Beit Hillel, motzinu she'eino achim nechnasim v'nachla al piyah. So Beit Hillel says, 1 second. But let's say she gives testimony that the husband has died. Okay, and let's say that her husband has brothers, and so if he dies, there's no father. Let's say, right? So let's say they're brothers. She's married to a brother, and she says, "My husband Ruvain died." So according to Beit Shammai, she can remarry and she gets a ketubah. Beit Hillel says, 1 second. Ketubah she shouldn't collect. That's money. It's a monetary matter. Beit Shammai says, what are you talking about? If you allow her to remarry, which is an issa mita and karet, worried about money? Says Beit Hillel, 1 second. Wouldn't you agree with me that if she testifies that her husband died, and now the brothers are there, and the brothers say, we want to collect our portion of the inheritance, you would agree that the brothers cannot collect their inheritance based on her so-called testimony. First of all, a woman is not allowed to testify in monetary matters. And number 2, she's only 1 witness. So you would certainly agree that her testimony is invalid in terms of money for the brothers. Amru lahem Beit Shammai, v'alo sefer ketuvata numod, shu kotev la im tinasi liacher titli mashakatuv lechi. Says Beit Shammai, you're right and you're wrong. Of course, you're right that when it comes to the brothers' inheritance, her testimony would not permit them to inherit, because that's a monetary matter. She's 1 witness, and she's a woman that typically is not accepted that's a whole other conversation, but she's possibly able. Won't get into that now. So you would agree with, so Beit Shammai says that's true, but the ketubah and the marriage are tied together. In other words, the ketubah is not, you think as a monetary obligation. It's a monetary obligation, yes, but it's interwoven with the marriage itself. That's what Beit Shammai said. He wrote her. In the ketubah says, when you marry somebody else, you collect the ketubah. Once you allow her to marry somebody else, the ketubah follows. As far as the brother's inheritance, that's a separate matter. That we treat as simply a monetary matter, unrelated, and she's invalid. But for the purpose of remarriage, the ketubah follows the marriage. And the Mishnah says, "V'chazru Beit Hillel lahora k'divrei Beit Shammai," and Beit Hillel changed their minds and agree with Beit Shammai. You have this with Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai several times, and you have it in the Talmud, I say many times as well, which does say something I think pretty interesting about the way they see their disagreements. They're really trying to get to the truth. It's not about they're not obstinate about their own positions, which is, I think, a very powerful idea that the Mishnah puts forth. That's part of maybe why Rabbi includes these other people. But here he actually goes out of his way to say that Beit Hillel changes their mind. The Chazru Beit Hillel, the Horek Beit Shammai. We have this elsewhere as well with Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. We always think of Beit Shammai is very rigid and strict, and Beit Hillel as not, but that's not always the case in the Mishnah at all. So the more Mishnah you learn, the more you see that it's not so simple. In any event, these are some of the mishnayot that deal with the aguna. Now, last week I wanted to deal more broadly with questions of testimony, which come up in this tractate actually in the context of the aguna. So I do want to do it. Does anybody have any questions or comments anything that we said till now? The last 55 minutes, that is. Anybody questions or comments about that?
It's been quiet in chat.
Quiet, okay.
If you're an attendee with questions, I'm happy to unmute you. Just ask me in chat or use the raise hand function.
Okay, let me say this. What we have another 4 minutes. Let me take one more. I think one more Mishnah. One more Mishnah. Which is also a fascinating Mishnah. Chapter 15, Mishnah 4. So there is an exception to. We talked about the fact that one witness is acceptable, and one witness is any person, man, woman, anybody is acceptable to testify about the fact that the husband has died to permit a woman to remarry. The Mishnah, though, Mishnah 4 of chapter 15, has an exception to the rule. There's an exception to the rule. The Mishnah says, Hakol ne'monim lo'ida, chutz mechamota ubat chamota, sarata yevimta ubat bala. So the Mishnah says, at the beginning of Mishnah number 4 of chapter 15, if somebody comes and said, your husband died, we believe that person. And only need one person. But there are 5 exceptions to the rule. There's some people that we don't believe. If the mother-in-law comes and says your husband died, or your sister-in-law says the husband died, or the other wife says the husband died. Man has 2 wives, and the other woman says, our husband Reuven, I have sad news to tell you, Leah, he died, right? Or Yevimta, right? Or the daughter of her daughter-in-law, right? Her stepdaughter, not daughter-in-law, a stepdaughter. These 5 people, these 5 women, they're valid to testify for somebody else that the husband died, but they're not valid to testify for her. Why not? Because these 5 women, the Mishnah assumes, potentially hate her. By the way, they hate her to the degree the mother-in-law, maybe your mother-in-law loves you. And also, you can't testify for the mother. She can't testify for the mother-in-law either. She can't say that my father-in-law died. She wouldn't be believed to allow the mother-in-law to remarry. We're afraid he didn't really die, but she'll then remarry, and then the father-in-law will show up 2 months later, and the mother-in-law's life will be totally ruined. So the Mishnah presumes that these 5 potentially would try to do in this woman, including, by the way, which is remarkable, including the other wife. Now we know the other wife she's a rival. Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Leah says to Rachel, Reuven's dead. Now the point is, if Reuven's dead, okay, it affects her as well. In other words, Reuven's dead, and therefore she herself can in fact remarry if he's actually dead, right? If there were no other woman, we would believe her about herself. She's believed about herself, but she's not believed to allow the other woman to remarry. So this is an exception to the rule. The Mishnah is very practical in a certain case, certain sense. So the Mishnah says, even though everybody's believed, well, these are the 5 exceptions. where in fact they're not believed. And this raises the whole question of, bigger question with Aguna. One of the main questions is the believability of the witnesses. So we'll deal with that in 2 weeks. We have an extra class on the 24th. No one else meets, but we're meeting on the 24th just to finish the tractate. Next week, we will skip Chazguna for 1 week and deal with Chalitza. There's a one paragraph about Chalitza, which we have to do. Then we'll come back to Aguna and discuss other aspects of Aguna that the Mishnah will deal with, and also testimony in general that comes up in the last chapter and a half of the book, of the tractate, some of which is extremely interesting, actually. So we'll stop at this point, I think, and we will continue next week with Chalitza and finish up with Aguna. So if you have any questions, you can always email me, and we'll continue in the next 2 weeks and finish up.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi Silber. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another afternoon of learning. I would like to highlight some upcoming classes. The same week as our last Mishnah class, December 25th to 27th, is our Winter Zman on the topic of organ donation in Judaism. We have the pleasure of learning with Rabbi Reifman, Rabbi Jonathan Weiner, and speakers from Renewal. And the link I just posted in chat is to the Winter Zman website. Please feel welcome to sign up and find out more. And if you happen to have the federal holiday of Christmas off, please consider joining us. Thank you, everyone, and Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach. Thank you.